Good Friday morning, Market Chameleons, and everyone joining us for the first time. Thanks for coming by and checking out the Market Chameleon pre-market show. Before we get started, please take a look at the shared disclaimer. Realize that neither Market Chameleon, Dimitri, or myself are registered investment advisors or broker dealers. If you are searching out investment advice, please search out a registered representative. This show is for informational purposes only concerning Market Chameleon tools and products. With that, D, you ready to roll?
Yep. Good morning, everyone. And I'm going to share my screen here really quickly. And I think today what I want to do is jump to something that we were talking about yesterday. And I think, unfortunately, I didn't realize I wasn't sharing my screen during the tutorial. So
Yeah,
we'll,
well, that
we'll
was two of us,
do,
buddy.
yeah. So what we'll do today is go over this same concept of a stock volume burst. And what is a stock volume burst? How do we detect it? Why is it important, and how you can potentially apply it to your strategies or your trading insights. Okay, so right now what I'm doing is I'm on this screener. You guys don't have access to this screener yet. You do have the volume burst, but I'm going to use it just to show some interesting scenarios that we could go over. And, what can we glean from that information? Now, when we talk about a volume burst, this is a stock volume burst. What we're looking for is an unusual spike in a trade or in a very short period. So when we look at the volume for the entire day, there are a lot of things that are going on there. And here we're going to dive deeper into the volume. We're going to see, and we're going to categorize this volume, and one of the ways is to find a volume burst. And this is where perhaps a larger trader, an institution, somebody is doing something where they grab a lot of liquidity at a very, very short period of time. So we're going to limit, we're looking at within a minute period. And when we look at them, we're going to be looking for some footprints of what might be happening. Okay, and to do that, we're going to look at the volume burst, and then we're going to look at the surrounding data to try to paint us a picture of what perhaps might be happening around these stocks. I'm going to show you two different scenarios. Okay, so what I did here was initially what I wanted to look for is common stock where there's a big volume burst on a day, basically two times its average daily volume. And we wanted to see where there wasn't any corresponding volume burst on the sell side, because sometimes you're going to see volume bursts on buy and sell side, which could mean things, the stock may have had news, earnings, and then it's not unusual to see a lot of, institutional or large trading activity around those events. But what we want to see is, well, a volume burst, perhaps that is, overwhelmingly, balanced or leaning towards one side. And can we explain it or not? Because if we can't explain it, then maybe there's something else going on where there is a buildup or accumulation of a position. Okay, so there are different, though, in these volume bursts, there are different ways that we could kind of look at it and then draw inferences. So one of these, right before the show, I just started to look at some of them, and then I brought up two, and two are very different. So this one, here's one in IVP, okay, Inspire Venner. And we detected yesterday that there was a huge volume burst on the buy side for $4.7 million worth of stock. And we didn't see any on the sell side. So we're going to take a look at that first. And then we're going to try to infer what we think, is going on. All right. So I'm going to go to this IVP over here. And this here is a summary of the volume burst. And there we have a minute by minute VWAP table. So what is the volume burst? It's within a minute, we look at the dollar value of the stocks traded. And if for that time period, this is an unusually high trade, okay, unusually high volume trade, we tag it as a volume burst. And then we keep track of that summary statistics. So in IVP, we detected that there were two large volume bursts yesterday, 0 sell volume bursts. For both of the volume bursts together added up to $4.7 million worth of stock for an average price of $4.97 VWAP price, and it ticked up by 21 cents on average. So that's the price impact. Okay, so this is the price it traded at, VWAP price amount, and this is the price impact. And we could compare it. What does it typically look like on an average day? In the last 30 days, you could see you saw 1 volume burst on the buy side, 2 on the sell side. And so this count is not that unusual. We're not seeing like a consistent or persistent buy. There was only 2, right? And the notional value is much higher, 4.7 million versus 227,000. This is the VWAP price. Oh, wait a minute. And this is the average tick. So there's a bug in there. I have to take a look. So let's take a look at this over here. I think this might have had a reverse split actually, but let's just take a look at that VWAP volume burst and try to infer what we think happened. So I'm going to drop this down, and you see 2 of them happen, one at 9:31 and one at 10:55. So I'm going to click on 9:31, and here almost right away, right after the open, what we see is $3.8 million worth of stock on a buy burst over here. And then, then afterwards, what happens? What we're looking for is a couple things. When a big trade happens, then did the liquidity on one side dry up, right? Because for stock to go up, right, what happens? For stock to go up, well, you'd have to have buyers, potential big buyers, clean up big sellers. And if you take that stock off, there's no more inventory, but there's more buying pressure, it'll go up, right? Or if the buyer gets cleaned up and there's no more buy pressure, that liquidity's gone, it could go down. So what we want to see is, well, what happens after, right? We detected this buy burst, and now we want to watch the market reaction following. And what we see here is right after 9:31, we see that, all of a sudden, we didn't have a sell burst, but the bid started to fade. In other words, even, on these volumes, all of a sudden, let me see. So this was 8 times the average. All of a sudden, the bids started to fade, right? This is what we see. And they can continue to fade. And what that could imply is that a large buyer got cleaned up. So you see this big buy burst on this big uptick in the morning, right? Look, like we could see here that the stock, something was going on. Something happened, especially in the morning, where it could be somebody had to cover short, somebody who wanted to buy just went in and bought it. Because they found the other side. But looking at this, that the market couldn't even hold those prices. Like, look how fast it started to drop. Right. So that could indicate that maybe there was a big buyer, but that he's no longer there. And we could see how fast the prices fade, which is, just showing you that the market is very weak and those prices cannot hold. And we could see that continue to go on throughout the day. And what we see is that there was another buy burst, just one, the second one at a lower price, 443, not as high impact, and then it was done. So in this situation, even though there was an imbalance, big buy burst, we didn't see a sell burst. In other words, we didn't see a large volume where the stock ticked down. But what happened was that following that trade, the market couldn't hold. It didn't hold those prices. It almost immediately, the market makers, the specialists, the limit order books were not strong enough to even hold that price. And you could see how the price just started to fade away from that buy burst VWAP. Okay. So that's one scenario where it looks like a big buyer got cleaned up. Especially in the mornings, sometimes you may see that if there's a short that needs to cover, right? Or it could be a lot of shorts that needed to cover because there's just no stock available. And if you're short a stock and your broker can't locate the stock, well, you're forced to cover that position. Okay, that's maybe something that happened. So let's look at a different scenario now. Okay, let's look at another buy burst, and this one I looked at TPR. So this also I found over here. This is this third one down, and I noticed this buy burst on this side was 3.4 times its average daily volume, while the ratio on the sell side was very low. So let's see what might be happening there. So now I'm on TPR. And here we have a different scenario. Here we see that on the buy side, there were 16 buy bursts throughout the day. And that compares to an average 5. So that's 3 times. So it wasn't 1 or 2, but they were pretty persistent, right? It was repeat. It wasn't like they took the liquidity and they're gone. That's done. They were in there throughout the day looking for liquidity. And it looks like when they found it, it's either in a dark pool where they found the other side. It could have been on the lit exchange where there's a big limit order. But when they, as they were finding, it was a persistent buy burst on that side. Okay, so there's a total of 16 of them for a total of $32.6 million worth of stock. Well, how does that compare to average daily? About 9.7 million. So it's a decent amount over the average. This is the VWAP price, 39.41. So we see here that the stock at 40.37 is going in the direction, in that same direction of the buy burst, right? It's floating up in their direction. Let's say they're in the money. That as they're buying it, you're seeing the pressure on the stock moving higher. And on average, the uptick on each buy burst was 10 cents compared to 3 cents. So we could see here that the price impact on the buy burst is bigger than usual. So let's look at the sell burst, because on the sell, if there's an equal amount of sell bursts, that might just mean something might be going on where things are reacting to news on both sides, but we don't see the same type of activity. We only saw one sell burst here for 1.6 million at VWAP price 38.65, average down, but we see that this sell is way below where that price is, below this VWAP, meaning that sell burst, once they cleaned up, there was no more liquidity there, or not enough liquidity, and the buyers started to scoop up the order book. Okay, so this would be more consistent with a stronger market, right? The other one, what we looked at, was a weaker market where we saw one buy burst and almost immediately the bids started fading, right? It didn't even hold for that long. It was like almost right away we saw it go from $5 almost down to $4.30. But here it looks more consistent. So let's take a look at, here's the sell burst over here at 9:45. So I'm going to click on the sell burst first. And you could see here, it followed two buy bursts. So what makes this a buy burst is that the volume, the volume on this 1 minute and the dollar value traded, $2 million worth of stock. Well, that is 4.3 times that what typically trades in 1 minute in this part of the day. Okay, so it's looking at, around this time of day. And this is 4 times greater. Okay, so that's a volume burst. How do we know it's on the buy side? Well, what we see here is that the stock in this 1 minute ticked up by 18 cents. So went from 38.09 to 38.27. Well, for a stock to move higher, right, you would need more buy pressure, right? Because sellers cannot just make the stock go up, right? You would need buyers to make the stock go higher, just like you would need sellers to make the stock go lower, because they would have to hit the lower bids. So that's how we see that this was a buy burst here. But what happened immediately after the buy burst? The very next minute, what we see is that even though the volume wasn't as high, the market's faded higher. In other words, you scoop the limit order book on the side, but almost immediately the market's faded higher, meaning there was nothing behind there, right? There was like an air pocket. There was nothing behind those limit sell orders. And then we got another buy burst going higher. Then right here, we got a sell burst. Now, this sell burst is interesting because, one, it could correlate to something that just happened in the market. See, we have these other events happening in the market. And here we see at that same minute, there was a big sell burst in the S&P 500 stocks. Okay, like an unusual basket in S&P 500 stocks, which could have contributed to this. because a lot of stocks are pegged to other things going on in the market. But interestingly enough, right after, let's see what happened to that sell burst. That sell burst, even though we're seeing upticks of 18 cents, 28 cents, 23 cents, you get this big sell burst here, but the downtick wasn't that great, meaning that they're bids holding, holding that. Whenever there is a buy burst, all of a sudden then there must be more bid for at higher prices, because you could see how the sell burst didn't tick down that much. And then right after the sell burst, what do we see? It continues to float higher, right? That's a sign of strength. That, because think of how things trade. It doesn't have to be stock, like anything, right? It could be any market where you have a big, unusual amount of buying in some market, and you're going to have, if you have limited supply for sale and that comes off the shelf, there's no more available, and then you have more buy interest behind it, that's a sign of strength. Okay. And you could see that the idea there is, well, if there is a big buyer, you could see here on a typical minute, 2 million, 3 million, they need to, if there's 50, 100, 300 million of stocks to buy, you're not going to go all in at the market, because you're going to drive the price way up, right? Drive it way up, just like what we saw here, where it could be a short cover, right? Where the price was driven way up, but couldn't hold. Look how fast it went down. You were talking about within minutes, there's no bids to support it. And these bid fades, by the way, are just not even on highly unusual volume. It was just the bids below just faded lower. So here, what we did was after 948, we were like, okay, but let's take a look at it. So here are all the bids. So we were over here. We're looking at here in the 940s, 942, 944. But the interesting here is that it didn't stop there like it did in IBP. Right? They kept coming back throughout the day, all the way up to 357. They kept coming back, and wherever they found a liquidity, it looks like they bought it, right? Big. And we could take a look at it here. Here are these buy bursts. You could see if they're finding it in the dark pool. So it doesn't look like a lot of it's in the dark pool. So it looks to me like, here's the dark pool volume. It looks to me like they're actually finding it on the lit exchanges, and when they see a big limit order, they're grabbing it. All right. So let's come back to this. Oops, sorry. Let's come back to this. The summary. So at 10 o'clock, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 big buy bursts all in that hour. And then at 11 o'clock, we've seen them come back. And then right at the end of the close, more buy bursts, which is an indication that there is interest there. Somebody is interested, somebody's competing, somebody's looking at it, where they feel like that stock reached that point where they're building up that long and holding on to it, right? That's what it looks like, that they're building up that inventory, taking that stock, and not only holding on to it, but reaching for more. People see that, what I'm doing here. So we could even look at the biggest one. Let's see here. Which one's the biggest? The biggest one is at 10:03. So let's hit that one. 10:03. Here's at 10:03. Traded $3.5 million worth of stock. And keep in mind that these statistics are tracking how things usually trade for this stock, right? So $3.5 million worth of stock may not be a lot for something like Amazon, but for this particular stock, this is a lot. So here, what's interesting is that, we see that there's a big buy burst, 3.5 million, didn't move that much, 0.4 cents, right? So it wasn't an unusual movement in the uptick. If it was, we would have it colored like this. So here, it only moved up 4 cents. Let's just take a look where that happened. Here it is. So it happened, only 35% of that was in a dark pool, so it could have been on the lit exchange. Moved up 4 cents, and then afterwards, it just continued to move higher, which is indicating to me that they spotted, as the stock was moving, it got to the limit order book where they spotted a limit order. They didn't have to sweep the book much higher. There was stock offered there on the limit order book, and they grabbed it, right? So they didn't have to go and bid up a lot. What they did was, as the stock moved higher, they saw this limit order. This is what my inference is. They saw that limit order. They said there's, whatever, 80,000, 90,000 shares sitting there. I'm going to grab it. Once they did, what happens? If there was more for sale, you would see it reappear or push down, or other people come in, but we didn't see that. It just continued to float higher. Okay, so that's how this stock progressed throughout the day yesterday. Well, I wanted to show you two different scenarios, because they're both buy bursts, but when we analyze it, we have a completely different story and picture. So hopefully that was helpful today.
Yeah, that was very helpful, D. Actually, Rob mentioned before we even started that he would like to have a recap of this show. So that was a great recap. Thanks so much, buddy.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Stay safe out there. Have a great trading day.
Actually, before we turn off the broadcast, we do have a special event next week, right? On Tuesday, an interactive broker webinar.
Yep. Yes. So next Tuesday, we're going to be doing a webinar at 2 p.m. Eastern. You have to register with Interactive Brokers, and we're going to be analyzing single leg option trades. That's what we're going to be doing. And
with the new tool, I think actually, Rob, I may have forgot to mention it to you. Rob asked a couple days ago about that tool. When is it going to be launched for everyday use?
So we're hoping to do it the night before, so you'll have it in the morning. But as we're fixing these bugs and I'm looking at them, I'm hoping to do that by Tuesday morning.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. Sorry for holding up that question for a couple days, Rob. It just popped into my head. Thanks, D. Everyone have a great trading day and a great weekend. We will see you on Monday. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.